to have two other colleagues coming. They may be a bit late, but they should come. And then we're going to share a dinner together. But I think it's a lunch, yes, sorry. And that's we use different words.
Oh, okay.
That's really an honor. I think it's very important that we have the occasion now to discuss certain themes that we could raise and we could hold and we could carry in the Parliament to maybe explain you also a bit on which fields and which files we are working also and what are the domain. I mean, I'm in the Foreign Policy Commission and you are in the economic, the commission, which is very important because we, of course, have tried to change also the way Switzerland cooperate economically with China, and we may talk about it. So I think those two commissions are important to raise subject to linked with the protection, but also with the cooperation with Tibet. So it's important for us to look at discussion. And also, Bramble, I want to say that whenever you need, and you know it already, we have information, but whenever you need, or you think Switzerland should do something, or the Swiss Parliament should do something, do not hesitate at any time to contact me or to contact my colleague. It would be a pleasure. We try all we can to raise that. Just to tell you that I was before being, I'm in the Parliament for 2 years, before being parliamentarian, I was the mayor of my town, Carouge in Geneva. And in 2013, I invited the Tibetan representative in Geneva on the 1st of August to express the hope we had that one day we could have a national day and Tibetans could have their own country, so we had the Tibetan flag, and every year we had the Tibetan flag in my town also. So it's also, for me, even a bigger honor because I was not, I always, I felt all the time with new combat and new population and new goals, and so it's a great pleasure to have you here today and to be able maybe to do something. Cedric Vermouth, another colleague, Socialist Party, the president of Socialist Party, co-president, which is here today. So I was just introduced and welcoming. And I think it's good to have that a bit more than 1 hour to discuss really special things we can. Thank you. Words is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Honorable members for giving us the time and the space to speak about Tibet. Switzerland and Tibet had a very long relationship since we came to exile. Because of Pestalozzi and Red Cross, Switzerland was the first country to receive some Tibetan refugees here in Switzerland. Not only received the Tibetans here in Switzerland, but also helped with the rehabilitation of the Tibetans in India, Nepal, and Bhutan at that time, when we were going through a very, very difficult period. You know that we call ourselves Tibet the... okay, you want me to put this on? That's all. Okay. So we call ourselves the land surrounded by snow mountains. And you're very close to the Alps. You're part of the Alps, so we're also mountain people. That also brings us together. And there are several key issues that we want to address. We want your help in addressing and also push the government. I met some officials of relevant departments in your government this morning, and we had a very fruitful talk. that's why I think my colleagues will also present you a book called Tibet Brief 2020, written by Mr. Michael Van Wald van Praag. He is not just a Tibetologist, but he is also an expert on international law. And his last 10 years, he spent a lot of time researching on the history, not only of Tibet, but the whole of Inner Asia and its relations with each other before the concept of modern state came into being. Because the Asian relations are different in that context. So that is why the Tibet Brief concludes that Tibet was never ever a part of China. Whether what China is talking about, that Tibet is part of China since time immemorial, or we don't know when time immemorial is, even before human beings came on this earth, or are they talking about 7th century or 13th century or 18th century? But any argument on those bases legally does not hold water, and legally Tibet was an independent state before the occupation of Tibet by Communist Party of China. So we will present you the book once we finish the discussion, and if you find time, please do go through it. And this is one evidence, this is one of the latest books that came out of Tibet. It's by coincidence that we also have another book by a Chinese professor, because the book Tibet Brief 2020, written by Michael, is based on many sources, not just Tibetan sources, but also Chinese sources, Mongolian sources, Japanese sources, and other countries in Asia. The other book is by a Chinese professor called Professor Lau. He is quite old now, and he was teaching in the city of the Hong Kong university before, and now he's in San Diego. And he is quite old. That's why he said, I'll start from the latest. So he started from the Manchu period. There is always this academic discourse within the Chinese community as to who is the real Chinese. The Han, the real Chinese, or the Mongolians are also Chinese, or Tibetans are also Chinese. If the Mongolians are Chinese, then they can claim half of the world because of how much area that Genghis Khan conquered. So he concludes, based on Chinese imperial records, not just any other historical record, but from the Chinese imperial records, that China during the Manchu period, or China during the Ming period, the Ming period of the Chinese dynasty, or Yuan of the Mongol dynasty, never ever considered Tibet as a part of China. So that is the legal perspective of Tibet being an independent state. So therefore, we requested the Swiss government also not to repeat that China is part of, or Tibet is part of China, because you are going against international law if you say that. But politically, it's a different matter. Legally, you are going against international law because China occupied Tibet by force. Even the so-called 17-point agreement that was forced on us under the threat of war or under duress was signed only after China's military aggression on Tibet, not by the acquiescence of the Tibetans to the Chinese. So therefore, the legal status of Tibet is very, very clear, and that is also the reason why the Chinese government keeps insisting on telling other countries that Tibet is part of China. If China knows that Tibet is part of China, then why should they tell other countries that Tibet is part of China? You should say that, or you should follow one China policy. Because they lack legitimacy. That is why they keep asking other nations. If you have a look at the Tibet Autonomous Region, what the China calls the China's Tibet website, any head of state coming from those countries who they can enforce their political will, they are always asked to say Tibet is part of China. So, only because they lack the legitimacy. And that is also because they asked His Holiness to say that Tibet was part of China since time immemorial, because they know that they lack legitimacy. So this is one point I want to encourage the honorable members to tell the government of Switzerland not to repeat this. If possible, even say that Tibet was an independent country. In the United States, as early as 1991-92, they have made statements that Tibet is an occupied country, rather than saying Tibet was an independent state. This is important for us because we are committed to non-violence as a means to resolve the Sino-Tibet conflict. We will never ever resort to violence, because violence begets more violence, and violence is never ever a solution to resolve conflicts, to find a lasting solution. When we talk about non-violence as a strategy, as a way to move forward, then we are talking about the middle way approach, because middle way approach is a Buddhist concept. Here in this case, it's used in the political context to say that the middle way will not be the extreme of seeking separation from China, and middle way is not an extreme to integrate Tibet into China. So this is the middle way where we need autonomy for the Tibetans to be able to preserve our language, to be able to practice our religion, to be able to protect our way of life, and also, more importantly, Tibet's environment. So therefore, it's very important for nations to say, when we adopt middle way approach, to find a negotiated, mutually beneficial solution. The only leverage we have is that Tibet was an independent country, but we are not asking for independence of Tibet. That is why we have also this other book, that Tibet was an independent country, but the best way forward to find a solution is the middle way. That is both good for China as a state and Tibetans as a people. So therefore, this one position at this point of time, whenever an opportunity arises, right now dialogue is not going on. There have been contacts and dialogues from 2002 to 2010. That was mainly because China's coming out party, 2008 Olympics. At that time, we supported China's coming out party. His Holiness supported the 2008 Beijing Olympics. His Holiness also supported China's entry into World Trade Organization in 2000-2001, hoping that China will become a more responsible power once they integrate into the global political scenario. But unfortunately, it has not turned out as what we expected, or what the free world expected. What China is doing to Uyghurs today, what China has been doing to the Tibetans today, what China did to the Hong Kongers, and their attempts at conflagrating the situation on Taiwan, China's belligerence on India, and its expansionist policies in South China Sea are not a pointer to what China talks about as harmonious society within the country and harmonious relations with the international community. What they say and what they do are two totally different things. So this is one of the most important points. If you cannot say Tibet was independent, please don't repeat this statement that Tibet was not of China. Then the situation inside Tibet continues to be very grave. It is not as visible as the Uyghur problem because of the industrial scale of Uyghur concentration camps. But I had one visitor who came out from Tibet last year in Dharamsala after I took office, and he was explaining, because he comes from Hassa, so he knows the area near Hassa, and he was explaining to me about an area in Shushu where children had out from the college of that area, and then they all have to join that industry to work. So it's very mechanical. Tibetans don't have the right to choose what they want to work for, to find the right employment that they wish for. So this is also some form of concentration camp, even though it's different, a little different in nature. And Tibetan religion is at the very foundation of Tibetan language is at the very foundation of Tibetan religion and Tibetan culture. Tibetan, I don't know how many people know, but Tibetan language came from India, not China. Tibetan religion also came from India, not China, even though Buddhism went to China much before it came to India, much before it came to Tibet. So we are an extension of one part of ancient Indian wisdom. At one stage, in 8th century, we must have had the biggest transliteration house in the world, because we translated every single Sanskrit text into Tibetan. And we are the only country, even China has not managed that, we are the only country that has this reserve of Chinese classical, Tibetan, the Indian classical literature, and we preserve it to this day. Even today, Tibetan texts are being translated back into Sanskrit because those original texts are lost. Therefore, Tibetan language is very, very important for us to understand Tibetan Buddhism. Just to give you a brief overview of China's policies on Tibetan language, because it's at the very root of Tibetan identity and how it's being systematically destroyed. During Mao Zedong's time, they had to use Tibetan language for propaganda purposes, because none of the Tibetans speak Chinese, because Tibetans have nothing to do with China in that sense. Very few Tibetans speak Chinese. So during Mao's time, they used Tibetan for propaganda. Then there was cultural revolution, destruction of everything old, thousands of monasteries destroyed, numbers of monks and nuns were reduced to the minimum. Hardly monks and nuns to be seen during the cultural revolution. But after Mao's death, when Deng came into power, then he liberalized a little bit. There were also party leaders like Hu Yaobang who sent fact-finding delegations, because the top leadership doesn't know what is happening on the ground. So they found that the Tibetan situation has become worse and worse. So he sent back 85% of Chinese cadres back to China, and then tried to rehabilitate the Tibetan culture, religion, and language. And that was also the period when Panchen Lama, the former Panchen Lama, was released from prison, and he played a very important and crucial role in bringing back Tibetan language, bringing back Tibetan religion, and bringing back Tibetan culture. But unfortunately, he had a very untimely death. Many believed that he was killed by the Chinese authorities because his death was quite sudden, and there were indications on his physical body of poisoning, possible poisoning, but there was no autopsy done, so we cannot prove that. Then, after Chiang Kai-shek came, the situation became worse. You know, Hu Jintao was party secretary in 1989. He imposed martial law in Tibet, and the situation kept tightening up inside Tibet. And during Jiang Zemin's time, they started calling His Holiness the Dalai Lama a monk in a wolf's clothing. That was the state of affairs at the time. Then afterwards, Hu Jintao became president. They started talking about bilingualism, similar importance on both Tibetan language and Chinese language. Whereas the law of national autonomy, national regional autonomy, talks about preservation of the national languages in the so-called national minority areas. That is again going back on the law. Now, during Xi Jinping's time, they have started teaching Chinese from Montessori, because if you listen to what Xi Jinping is talking about today, he's talking about one nation, one language, one culture. So the whole aim is to eradicate the identity of the national minorities. And what we witness in Tibet is exactly that, even though it's not as visible in terms of these things being known Xi Jinping's time, or earlier during Hu Jintao's time, they introduced this. There were a lot of surveillance on the monasteries. Now you have so many CCTVs to monitor the movement of even within the monastery itself. The whole management committee of the monasteries, which used to consist of monks and nuns, today are occupied by people from the United Work Front, from the security agencies, to monitor everything within the monastery. And the curriculums are also set by the Communist Party, who does not believe in religion. Movement of monks and nuns has been strictly controlled. So monks and nuns, earlier when Tibet was free, they could move to any part of Tibet and teach and learn and all that. Today, monks and nuns, if they want to go out of the restricted territory where they are located, then they need a lot more permits. And for the monks and nuns to come from Qinghai or Qinghai province or Sichuan or Yunnan or Kansu areas into Tibet Autonomous Region itself is another process. It's like going into another country with a lot more permits for the monks and nuns to. And the recent appointments of Wang, who was the party secretary of Uyghur into Tibet, is also a pointer as to how Chinese government views the Tibetan situation, even though Tibetan has been very non-violent in our approach. Then, of course, by extension of the Tibetan Buddhism, it's also the Buddhist culture also being eroded every day, because when you remove the language and restriction of the religion, then culture also gets affected, and the way of life of Tibetans also gets affected. But the more important thing is the Tibetan's environment. We call ourselves the land of snows. Some land surrounded by snow mountain ranges. This is in our prayers for hundreds of years. And then, beginning of last century, I read a book in 1906 by a Christian missionary who was in Tibet. And in one of his chapters, it's titled as Roof of the World. From that time onwards, the Westerners started calling Tibet the roof of the world. Some people believe Tibet is very small, like Switzerland, but it's maybe, I don't know, 70, 80 times that of Switzerland. And compared to the mountains in Tibet, even the Swiss Alps are a little low. So, this big size, 2.35 million square kilometers, is almost 25% of, 23-24% of China's landmass. And this plateau extends beyond the territory of Tibet, starting from Afghanistan to Burma. And that plateau is very, very important. The Asians call Tibet the water tower of Asia, because all the major rivers of Asia originate from Tibet. Rivers that go into Pakistan, rivers that go into Nepal and India, rivers that go into Burma, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, and into China. Two of them. The two biggest rivers in China, the Yangtze and the Yellow. The Yellow is the cradle of Chinese civilization, also originated from Tibet. China started giving a little more importance to Tibet's environment only in 1998, when there was a huge flood on the Yangtze that destroyed many, they took many lives and destroyed a lot of property. So Tibet's environment is not a political issue. So also, human rights situation inside Tibet is not a political issue, it's a moral issue that people should not shy away from talking about it. That's why today Chinese environmental scientists call Tibet as the third pole, because of the amount of glaciers and permafrost that feeds all these major rivers in Asia, and it has consequences on all the riparian states in Southeast Asia. China does not share hydrological data with its neighboring countries. China has built multiple dams, at least 36 dams on the Mekong alone, from its origin till it reaches the next country. And they also have this plan to build the biggest dam in the world, 3 times the size of Three Gorges Dam, which is the biggest right now, at this place called the Great Bend, when the Brahmaputra takes a turn south into India. You know, Tibet Plateau was formed because of the tectonic shift of the Gondwanas and the Asian plates. And some scientists believe that it's still growing. That is why that whole area is seismic zone. And if something happens to the size of that kind of a dam, what will happen to people in India? They'll all be washed away. There could be serious consequences. Today we call ourselves political refugees, but tomorrow there could be so many environmental refugees because of China's control on the Tibetan rivers and trying to divert rivers north towards other regions of China, which are parched in many ways. So these are, lately we have been hearing about this whole gridlock system. Why do you think there are no more self-immolations? Why do you think Tibetans don't resort to any more protests and demonstrations, despite the difficult situation they are going through? Because there's so much control, so much control. If I live in Lhasa, you are coming from a rural Tibet, and either you have to live in a hotel or you have to live with a family. If you live with me, I have to be responsible for your political actions. To make sure there's this control of gridlock. If you take up political activities, my family suffers. Similar is the case with self-immolators. We are happy that self-immolation has come down to it. Our population is very small. We don't want more Tibetans to die, and self-immolation itself is a question of morality, but it's a thin line between violence and non-violence. But when it comes to Buddhism, we talk about motivation. None of these 155 Tibetans have tried to harm any Chinese. They only brought themselves, hoping against hope that the Chinese government will pay some attention to the plight of the Tibetans, hoping against hope that the international community will come to the rescue of the Tibetans. There was a time in 1963 when one Buddhist monk in Vietnam self-immolated and there was an international uproar. Today, 155 Tibetans self-immolated and the world did not move. Chinese government was not moved. The international community's response was very muted in many senses. It's worse than the concentration camps because people feel that it's not worthy to live because you don't have the freedom to think, freedom to express yourself, and freedom to behave in the way you think. So you are reduced to the life of an animal, an ordinary animal without intellect, which human beings are endowed with. So then lately I have been getting a lot of feedback from India, from inside Tibet, that Chinese government are going now family into families, asking them about their relatives outside. So the restriction is not only inside the territory of Tibet, extends beyond the territory of Tibet. So they get contact numbers of all their relatives outside. That's why in Switzerland we have about 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 Tibetans, many new arrivals from Tibet, but they're not able to participate in protests and demonstrations to show their grievances. Because if they are identified, their family will suffer inside Tibet. So this whole gridlock system is making it very, very difficult for Tibetans to come out with a factual situation inside Tibet. And since I took over, we made some changes to how we function. So we'll be focusing more on information gathering from inside Tibet. But unfortunately, it has become more difficult. Before 2008, we used to receive between 2,500 to 3,500 Tibetans every year. Most of them young children left back in India, not knowing whether they will ever meet their family again in their lifetime or not. Now, since 2008, when we had these huge demonstrations all over Tibet, participated by people from all walks of life, since that time there have been a lot of restrictions inside Tibet as well as on Nepal, because that is the only route through which our refugees come. And the passports are being taken away from people so that they don't seek visa to go out. So And by 2015, we had less than 100 people coming from Tibet. Last year, maybe also because of the pandemic, that we have only 5 people from Tibet. This year so far, only 9 people. So there is a lot less free flow of people, less contacts between Tibetans inside and outside Tibet. And because of the new developments of trade war between China and the United States also banned WeChat, a Chinese app that Tibetans popularly use it to have contact inside Tibet. China's belligerence on the Indian border also resulted in India banning this app. So one of our main instrument of communication also is blocked, so that also hampers information gathering from inside Tibet. So despite all these difficulties, we will be focusing a lot on understanding the actual situation inside Tibet so that we can inform the world as to what is happening. So this is the situation in Tibet today. And because of that, also because of a lot of Tibetans who came in the 80s, 90s and 2000s, a lot more Tibetans have come to Switzerland than before. So we have several generations of Tibetans, those who came in the 60s and 70s, who are now citizens of Switzerland, quite well settled. Then there are those who came in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and then those who are coming now with their series, and we have problem with their paper documents in Switzerland. That's why I informed the relevant authorities that I'm happy that you have not deported any of the Tibetans so far. So eventually, anyway, you give them papers. So and you have to give paper anyway in another 2, 3, 4 years' time. Why not give it to them now? Why you make them suffer for 2, 3, 4 years? Why do different cantons have different policies with this? We also cited the example of Sengalan, where it's also a factual thing that there are some Tibetans who came from India and Nepal. So the authorities in Sengalan said, we know some of you are from India, so why don't you tell the truth? I make sure that you don't get deported, and we sacrifice some of our people to experiment whether it's possible or not, and this was possible, fortunately. So Sengalan can be an example for other cantons. And we also requested the authorities to have a federal policy towards the Tibetans, because Tibetans don't have the right to choose the cantons that they want to go. They are sent by the federal government to different cantons in all the 25 different cantons that you have. And different cantons follow different systems, different policies, so it makes it very difficult for the Tibetan asylum seekers. So as of today, we are talking about 223 known cases of sandpaper, people who doesn't have paper. So I would be very happy if the Parliament can also tell the administration to find some way to resolve this. When you have to anyway resolve, why don't you do it earlier? Why you create this sense that the Swiss government is not being fair to us? And when you have conflagrations, violence somewhere in Syria or everywhere, then you get people to come to Switzerland or in other countries, and they get paper in no time. Whereas a continuing situation where people are suffering, has to face this problem. This was also made known to your authorities, and they promised us that they will follow through with the relevant departments and our people here in the Geneva office. Then, just to give you an idea of what I think is happening to China now, Xi Jinping is talking about going back to socialism. I wonder why, because one of his main competitors 8 years back, before he became the president, was Bo Xilai, who was the governor of Chongqing, and Bo Xilai was very pro-Mao. He printed the Red Book. He reprinted many books during Mao's time, but Bo was kicked out at that time. Now today, Xi Jinping is talking about going back to socialism. He's curbing on capitalism, free trade, like what he did to Jack Ma, to Alibaba. I also fail to understand why they are not trying to save Evergrande, the housing bubble issue that's happening in China, and then curbs on personalities like film actresses and actors who are popular in China. They also they don't appreciate effeminate personalities like pop singers of Korea. I expect more restrictions to come in the future if Xi Jinping is really serious about going back to socialism. And then, of course, they talk about harmonious society, harmonious relation with the international community. But what they're doing to the Uyghurs, what they're doing to southern Mongolians, southern Mongolian case is almost gone because the population of Mongolians in southern Mongolia is only what China calls the inner Mongolia. It's only 16%. The rest of the 84% are Turks and Chinese. And the same is going to happen to Uyghurs and to Tibet, because Tibet is huge. They are moving in people all the time through demographic aggression, what other people call as Sinification or Sinicization of Tibet. That is also the reason why we keep saying we don't have time. Not because time is not there, time is always there, but the problem is too much demographic aggression. China fails to understand the real aspiration of the Tibetan people, the right to use their language, their culture, religion, and way of life. But they always think that any solution to any conflict or any problem is development, development, development. That is why they build roads, they build railways which we thought were engineering impossible to do. Started from Kormo by linking the whole of Tibet to the mainland China. Earlier it was not possible for China to mine Tibet's virgin minerals, land. Because Tibetans don't mine. It's all virgin land. And you have so many resources there. But it was not economically feasible, because to send one truck from the border of China to the Himalayas, you need 4 other trucks to support that. So transportation becomes very costly. Now with the railway from Kormo to Lhasa, extended to Shigashe, extended up to Nyingchi to the east, which will again be extended, connected to Lanzhou in northeast of Tibet, and to east in Chengdu. It's going to bring many more Chinese into Tibet. Then you also have the Karakoram highway with Pakistan that China is building with $40 billion, reduced from 60 billion to 40 billion, to again put Pakistan into debt economy. But that is going to go from Western Tibet into Pakistan, Afghanistan. So once all these railways and networks are done, there will be many, many more Chinese coming in. That is the reason why we say we don't have time. There are quite a number of Tibetans who wants to for an independent Tibet, particularly the younger generations, because they are frustrated with how China is responding to the pragmatic middle way approach. So, but I tell them, let us forget independence for the time being. In the next 30, 40 years, if we are not able to go back to Tibet, even autonomy may not make sense, because there will be too many Chinese in Tibet. So there will be no Liechtenstein in Tibet. Liechtenstein has a lot of freedom. So you can compare Swiss with Liechtenstein and China with Tibet, because Liechtenstein has full autonomy, full power. So as much I try to roll this over and over in my mind, I find that China is very, very insecure these days. They feel that there's too much attack on Chinese communism from the international community. Because of the opaqueness of the system, we don't understand, we don't know how much opposition is there to Xi Jinping internally. I'm sure there is. Because when too much power is in the hand of one person, Xi Jinping is the most powerful after Mao, to hold all the offices of military, of party, and the government. If he does good things, he gets felicitated for this, but he will also be responsible for all the wrong things. the survival of the Communist Party. There's a lot of insecurity. That is why they spend more money on internal security than on external security. If there is no Communist Party, there is no international relations. So they don't bother about international relations right now because their main concern is to continue the existence of the Communist Party. This is my analysis of how the situation is growing. Now, therefore, just to give you an idea of what we think, how we can move forward, we'll keep trying. We have a large community here. I have a fine job, even though we have this growing social and demographic changes that are happening inside. We also use this opportunity for the Tibetans who are now resettled in different countries and become nationals there to be involved in advancing the Tibetan case worldwide. I'm sorry I took a lot of time, a little less time for interaction, but I think it's important because I don't know when I'll come back here. I would definitely like to extend an invitation for you to come to Dharamsala if you want to come personally or individually or through a delegation. We'll be very happy to receive you there. But when we have time here, opportunity, I thought I should express my full views rather than part by part. And I'm quite happy that there was good response from your administration, from your government, and hope it will be constructive. The first question they asked me was your visit successful? And I said, success depends on the outcome of our meetings, not the meetings. So it's up to your authorities to decide whether the outcome should be complete or not to make it a success or not.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for the overview. I had the occasion to hear you already at the forum, but it gives more insight and compliments, and it's very fruitful for us. I propose, because I'm going to share the lunch with you later, so I don't know if you're going to be here, but maybe you have questions. So maybe.
If you have questions, because you are leaving us, but I think you have made a reservation in downside, so we should not be too late. So maybe we can have our discussion also with the lunch. But if Cedric has
do we have 5 minutes from the question? Do we have 5 minutes before going there? I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so Cedric, who is leaving us, can maybe.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss with you and for coming to Switzerland and making us the honor of your visit. I would have actually 2 questions that would be very interesting. You talked about the integration of China in global trade and the effect on Tibet and the very open-minded attitude is holding its hand in the Tibetan government at the time when China was entering the international trade system. And then you said that there are now at least some doubts if that helped or even a negative outcome. But what would you say on how should the international community, or specifically Switzerland, then go from here? You know, we have a free trade agreement with China, and there was already that debate at the time when the free trade agreement was in Parliament. Does that help into opening a possibility of dialogue on human rights and Tibet and the Uyghur questions and others? But the results are practically zero. So, what would your point of view be? How should the countries like Switzerland continue? Should we be? Is it more effective to again cut the links we have with China, or is it more effective to continue the way of trying to have a dual approach and integration, and at the same time having these talks on human rights? Although we know that these effects have not taken place. That will be my first question. The second question: is there a link and an influence of the international tensions around the Taiwanese question, on how China behaves in Tibet and the way the international community quite aggressively also responds to the quite aggressive policy China is now showing off, at least around the island of Taiwan?
think if I take the second question first, I think you have to be very, very vocal and very, very straightforward in your approach in the case of Taiwan also, because Taiwan is a de facto independent state, despite what Taiwan claims or what China claims as the real ruler. But today, Taiwan is a free country. Taiwan operates on its own. So why should China, again, with its expansionist policies, subjugate another people, another country? And that is not fair for the Taiwanese, because we are not talking about just one small territory, we are talking about millions of people who live in there. And it's the responsibility of the international community when aggression is happening anywhere. If it's a peaceful solution, we can always support. If the Taiwanese people want that, if the Chinese government want that, we will all support. And it should be the same with this government. But when China is threatening to aggressively take over Taiwan, that is not good. We are living in the 21st century. Now this is time of dialogue, not using force and war against each other because you are more powerful than the other. This could even result in a third world war if it escalates. Now you're not talking about conventional machine guns by killing 5, 6, 10 people. You're talking about nuclear energy, and this is creating not just the Taiwan issue. If you talk to the Japanese, you know how jittery Japanese have become. You can also talk to the South Koreans and see how jittery South Koreans have become because of the regional conflicts that China is trying to impose. So I think Swiss government has to be very, very strong in telling the Chinese that this is not something that is acceptable to Switzerland or to the international community. Now with regards to trade relations between Switzerland and China, of course we supported WTO, Olympics and all that. Now our position is if you take part in the 2022 Winter Olympics, then you become complicit in what China is doing. You and we are neighbors. You know that I'm beating my wife, I'm beating my children. You see that, you hear that, and tomorrow I invite you for dinner and you still come to dinner and act as if nothing is happening. That's not how it should be. There are values that you cherish. Free country, of a democratic country, of human rights for everybody. But then other people are suffering and you just watch. That's not enough. So free trade is good. When I heard that for the first time, I thought, oh, now Swiss is becoming weak. China found a weakness in Switzerland because they are not able to enter the European Union through other countries. Because there has to be a unified trade policy for the European Union, which they don't have. There's no common foreign policy for the European Union. So China is using this as also as a tool. That's why I say what the European colonial powers use against the colonized country in Asia and elsewhere in terms of divide and rule, carrot and stick. The same policy China is using against Europe today. And Switzerland was not part of the European Union. It exists on its own at that time. And then they're using that as a weak link to enter into the European Union. And your government succumbed to that because politicians always look for short-term benefits or to get re-elected, not the long-term benefits. So I told you the authorities of China respects only strength, not weakness. So even if you engage with China, you have to be very, very categorical on the issues where you stand, particular principled positions that you hold dear to you. So you do trade with China, okay, but then you also have to make your position clear. More countries do that, and China will feel cornered. So otherwise, you strong supporter of Tibet. Tomorrow you speak in the parliament or outside to the media, and then China sanctions you. That's the only thing they do. That's the only thing. Just yesterday, he was speaking to a group of students in a university in Geneva, and then few students came and distributed papers. I know for sure that the papers are coming from the consulate, because if they don't do that, then they don't get visa to go back to China, even for Chinese citizens. So the same thing they adopt for all others, because they think it's very important for trade, for politicians or for business people to come to China. So they use this as a tool. And I also talked about the extraterritorial dimension that China has given curbing this, promoting the gridlock system. So I think it's very important that, of course, as someone who has been watching the international situation for a very long time, we know that Switzerland will not sacrifice their interests for the interests of the Tibetans, because national interest comes first to any nation. But at the same time, you have to be very, very clear in your position that you will not be in a position to compromise on the values that you so cherish. Tomorrow it might knock your door, because the world is so interdependent. So, of course, I'm not an expert on Swiss politics or the business relations that I'm also appalled at the extradition treaty that you signed with China. Why? Do you have Swiss people committing suicide and running away to China? You don't have criminals running out of Switzerland to go to China. The only thing is the other way around. They want control on the Uyghurs, they want control on Hong Kongers, on Tibetans, whoever they wish they can term as a criminal, and get them extradited to China. Why? Is there any gain from this? For the Swiss government? For the Swiss people? No. And I fail to understand why the Swiss government is doing this. To please China? Backwards to please China? That is your weakness. China will always take advantage of your weakness. You listen to them once, they make sure that they listen to you. I was also appalled to hear that you have given access, Swiss government had access for the Chinese authorities to look into the details of people coming here. And you talk about privacy in your country. All hypocritical, so ironical that this is happening to Switzerland. Very unfortunately, I'm sorry, I was a little more emotional.
Thank you, we should go. Okay, I have another question that I will ask you during the dinner.
During lunch, food is more important.
During the lunch, exactly. Thank you very much, and let's go to share a lunch now. Thank you very much.
I think we will offer you this book whenever you, I know politicians are very busy, but whenever you find the time.
Even in German.
Yes.
Very nice.
What is this already? Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
That one I got. No.
And this is our response to the white paper that China published on May 23rd of this year. I'm not really happy, but this is good enough for now. It's in the short few months that I was in office, we tried to do that. So,
Thank you very much.
thank you so much. Then maybe later through our office we'll also go through something by Michael Van Waldpraag, because it's very informative, very the legal side of that, and I think this is
thank you very much.
And then later on I will
Okay, I have
l'occupation vietnamienne.
So Summer.
Thank you so much for your
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Agenda for?
Sen vi fick presentera strikt bild.
Yeah. So you cannot go without a Tibetan scarf.
Of course.
This is our all-purpose scarf, and more so these days for diplomatic scarf. Only thing was Klaus Kinkel missed that. Many years ago, Klaus Kinkel thought this is something else.
I know you.
You saw in 1996. Klaus Kinkel thought this is nuclear weapons.
Not exactly.
You
There's a huge collection. My children like it very much.
If you have too many, you can open a shop.
Yeah, I think I could open a shop. I have been in Dharamsala and
Yes, of course.
Backdrop. You can take pictures from there, I think. Yeah. 그래도 저 안수 비밀직 주고 시주 가야 버티 수주 가야 버티 누가 태배하게 치에도 아니 벽이 장생이 맥이 never fit 게 딱나 예외차리야 마이클 밴 월밴 프라케 탭스톤이래 대하나 시기 때문에 프로페서 라우게 탭스톤이래 진짜 뭔가 개나님도 계시에 겁이야 우마스는 계제 시도 좀 봐. 먼저 벽 장생 임버티 그랑싱을 두버지는 거지 시기를 마도 시기 우마시도 선발이야 아니지 표현이잖아 콘도에 매력들이 저원이는 조금 매배 손상 계급 수수수기 시주스베 qab이야 아니 표현에마 자나 그 제주 자나 마비 슝 제주 마치 그 뭐나 아니 표현이 랑세이 바탕 단다 표현 쪽이 우마 쪽이 요백이 내가 그래 다나시 당한테 수준의 나노를 표리 마무식 랩디어를 표가다 수준따라를 저와다 너무네 로주라 하시 두고요래 토마토망한 제주 레벨 qabla 마우칠리아 안식 그 잡주기 네업데이트 급티두기 페스톨로지 다 안식 레드크로스 신이 게라마비기 그 마우칠리아 로체체 텔리아 미세차디요레 디데다 짐베 탄다이 팅산투주도 치메이네 스위스나로니아 페미 두노게 동식 도신 렙데이드 사마티 네랑 토네 탄다이 메이네 페미솔라 익시 말아베 강에데 체디게 여러 지상의 군주도 쉬에를 가르스나다 칸주기 단답어도 표면지게 파 야랑 로보다 야랑 로베 내주들이 중요한 말이지. 이 중요한 매주 선발을 간다를 로 가시시나 칸주 익시 찐이 되게 여러 되게 유도 선발 때 단단한 얘는 제셔버 있는 민셈 나올리네 오 수수운딩아 그리 치부야 삼산도. 근데 로 가시직 두고 양시에는 신의 직제 유도 선발이야 셈을 서로 밀어지 연구를 봤으니 강에 뭔가 체계제 대단 대수행백이 다 직내도 심바 가까이 그 나눠를 자라내다 가르쳐고 유명 시주 간데 심구고 유명 게나 평용은 내다 가르쳐고 유명 게나 슝기 에너지 야가지 보잖아 야수지 태메지 아메리카 냠도 대화다 유럽 냠도 대화다 들어서다 교식심부 쉬우시고 요거다 진짜기 내가 그 턴에 간정문에 직 따당한데 간데씩 통나한데 간데서 통구 유명 대조의 관점 제시 잡았다 하벌도 수스 흉궁원에 다지 믹스에기 총대기 개인샤요 같은 데다 안팅엔 되월이야 계속 코엘라 직견아 그 흉대 미네기 다 수스 나올이야 미카시에게 루주 네범네 심주 체주에 내단도 오던데 게스트네 영원되기도 아니 수스 나올이야 총마침보다 안지 접시기 조각하지기 다다나이네 있잖아 냠도 대화 숙shum부 샤야다 tinde기 내다만 무시온되고 유두 삼바 안텐주기 내단간에 지켜졌다 균현시야도 그렇죠. 저도 팀에서 지리 배나 더 디고들 저에 미 수슝 나저와 숙샤 차기열 와다 저도 팀에서 백일이야지 비야야다 슝네 지하마도 지기 조 지리고나 저와 차기열의 디파트먼트 미니스트리 오브 저스티스 저와 차기열의 간다 스위스기 슝을 저와 차기열에서 뭐봐 지금 제외 리군 당한도 tunje 리군 바라려야 구도 십자시와 토랑도 가면 슝이래 그래서
한국 다 세트 치고 싶지 두대 대표 주된 저수 시에네 나 필요 도왔는데 이걸 나한테 그런 치시고
알았어 씨
야 쇼를 준비해 줘야지
알았어
ne to wo kyap chon da ne le de na cho to tish ko to na bo
los.
tanda pe kuna di tendushunang Nicolas Valdo sungora kuna tsang Nicolas kuna France chol shuni pe tapsa shunang ge sungdwa ni pe tanda kare nang to kuna nangi insus ni tanda diora briska birhaimo ajala kuna ni social party da kuna nidon chudula tanamsa pe anzu nidon chudula parliamentarian kashe che anzu chokpa che ramsana yoin ba tu ko ni tondo kuna matya sofi singa jore kuna ya thari pe tumdu shen kuna ya anzu swiss la glarner lang so ya peba mangor kuna pi de la shush pebal kabuna che shush dina charo nang da ni tonda pe nang tondo cedric vermouth sungora kuna ge pe pebal kyapsana ni konglo shonshe che kuna ga party president
그래서 다 달린기 제리 고 Sikyong 게 통통 차고래 저저 팀에 코나 바냠들와 제제 코디나니 데 스위스 티베탄 애소시에이션들와 스위스 티베탄 말에 건다 스위스 티베탄 프렌드십 애소시에이션들와 and the association 디 코디 고조 그래 다들 처음에 가져 예배나 보자
안주 처음에 직동 합격체 주예들이 두두가 직동 국적 개축했음라 페바당 스위스냠도 제군한테 도분나니 니지 주나 pepe tunda gyabza yongye tunda che nezu pepe nezu gangwa hakoye tunda kuna tudu gang zunang re da lo shib da nishu zautum lo shib judu wora tsoko di zuni ini yang zu ya Swiss parliamentarian friendship Swiss parliamentarian organization for Tibet organization diri zuni gechu ke jigdong kupte gechu kepkula zuni da lo sumju soni ruwa kuna zu tanda hanzu chozo mi nishu tsanga yo ani party jamanda chutsna party chik chuchma parliamentarian de ya swisso ne stendera da national ra tsmorba ni chikta nenge chu chik kinge diri maya grafi ajla kuna ge ni don chudula peora ni pebal pe dinangor charo nangor karinang tuwa hanzu tenda didirwa hanzu pe nezo hakoye che pe tam Swiss mima la pe tenda hanzu dis manga tam tuye so kas tam so kuna sta dus de pa tam che ne shuda hanzu shungla hanzu lo tyapza che tenda ta tesa hanzu yang kange diga yorba Swiss la pe ni shu meba che hanzu la kuna hanzu karnang tu nang tu ta ine ya chokpa chik chuch mendu kangla kanggu digurwa ni shungi da anzu party de kuna anzu charo nang nege kunzu kari nang tuba nang nege anzu party yang kashe yang dis chika kuna Swiss gi kuna anzu lokso tambu deyi toba che kunzu dis kunzu kazu nang tu nege nang ni nang du na anzu ni shukni gyap tu mar kuna anzu ke kuna anzu team yore to dan jorba 니네 그런지 그 petition 안주 petition 저 그런지 그 사이죠 저 차로랑 저 이네 그래 interpellation 가리네 강구 가지 나도 해요 좋아 이네
this morning
very interesting to hear news about the situation also in Tibet. We are very preoccupied. Very interesting also to see his vision, to share his vision, and that he shared with us, and also to discuss on what could be taken, what measures we could take in the Swiss Parliament, but by Switzerland as a whole, to help Tibet and Tibetan population.
Right. And you are a member of Swiss Tibetan Parliamentary Group for Tibet. How does the group work in Parliament to bring attention to the situation inside Tibet and to make it possible that the Tibetan representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama can have dialogue with the Chinese government?
So we cannot do miracle in the group, but of course we discuss about all subjects linked with China as a whole, but also linked with with Tibet, or linked with human rights in the region, and we organize several discussions with all parliamentarians. The idea is, in fact, to talk about Tibet, to talk about this unbearable situation that should be stopped as soon as possible, and how freedom has shrunk in the region and in Tibet particularly, and how urgent it is to take measures. And that's a bit okay what we talking about, and we coming with in the different commissions with proposals. Like, okay, we voted obliging the government to make a report on the situation of Tibetans and Uyghur people in Switzerland. We also obliged them to make a report on the situation of human rights in China in regard with the dialogue Switzerland is having for 30 years. So, things like this to raise the subject in order for the parliament here to talk about Tibetan situation, and I think it's very important. You have to know you're not alone, and even in Switzerland, we really preoccupied about Tibet.
Right. One last question, Nicola. How many members are there in the Swiss Parliamentary Group for Tibet currently, and do you see it expanding in the next years?
Yeah, there's more or less 20 people, but a lot of people that are not part in the group, because you have so many groups, so you're not part of all the group, but have a lot of sympathy for Tibet cause. But I think it's expanding, and most of the people, they are, yeah, as I said, they have sympathy. So I guess it's expanding. The news also, it's through IPAC, which is Interparliamentary a group on China. We are working also about Tibetan questions on an international level, and that's very important. So parliaments to work together, parliamentarians to work together on finding solution and sharing solution and also legal solutions that are proposed in one parliament or another. And that is growing, the interest is growing, and more people are coming to the cause and to the support of Tibetans. So I think, our group is going to have, it's going to enlarge soon.
So looking at the current Swiss-China relations, are you optimistic about Tibet cause?
I am optimistic that Switzerland will take it more and more into account. I think, and I always said that Switzerland should not be afraid to say clearly and publicly its position on China, but also on Tibet and on the non-respect of human rights and freedom and democracy in the region. And it's not a bad word to say it. And Switzerland is a free country, and I invite my government to be a bit more free in the way they talk about the region and to give their point of view on that. And I think, Chinese has to understand, the Chinese government has to understand that Switzerland is a free country and we have freedom of speech, and we have to use it. So I'm quite optimistic because more and more people are questioning the situation in the region. And I think our government starting realizing that it cannot last for long, that when we have to react, but it doesn't go fast enough, and I really would like the government to go a bit faster and really to say clearly and loudly, like other governments are doing now, that human rights are part of democracy, and democracy is part of liberal democratic rights, and it's part of the international rules, the one we have all of us to support. So we cannot just let a big country like China turning into a dictatorship without at least saying that we do not agree with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Swiss Tibetan Friendship Association has been founded in 1983. That means we are almost 40 years old. Of course, in the beginning there were a few hundred people who got membership, and now currently we count 1,560 members. Out of them, about 10% are Tibetans.
So today you had organized the first meeting with Sikyong in the Parliament building. How did the interaction go?
Oh, it was very familiar in a way, and we were very happy to receive him along with the members of Parliament of the Parliamentarian Group for Tibet. Co-President Nicolas Walder was chairing from the group side, and there was Priska Birrer-Heimo, also a very long time member of the group. She was also joining the last group visiting in Dharamsala. And then one more member of parliament was joining, Cedric Wermuth. He is currently co-president of the Social Democratic Party of Switzerland. And Sikyong did explain us about his wishes to the Swiss government, of course, and what we could do from by supporting the Swiss, the parliamentarian group for Tibet, bringing resolutions to the parliament.